In this video, we'll be saving and loading patches for the Korg NTS-1 using MIDI Goblin. Pairing a MIDI controller with the MIDI Goblin will give you hands-on access to all of the NTS-1's parameters, essentially turning your MIDI controller into a big old NTS-1 with sliders and patch saving capabilities. We can also use the MIDI Goblin to save patches made in the NTS-1 editor by Momo. That way we can take our patches with us anywhere we want. No computer or cell phone apps required. The NTS-1 is a great little synth. The NTS-1 is a great little synth. It gives musicians the ability to create some really beautiful and complex sounds. It looks neat, it sounds great, it's small, and affordable. Unfortunately, when it comes to user input and feedback, the NTS-1 is pretty limited. There's only 3 potentiometers for controlling its many parameters, and the display, well, it sucks. The Mark I also doesn't have a MIDI out connection, but we can work around that. Just a quick reminder before we get started though, the MIDI Goblin Kickstarter launch date is April the 30th, 2024. And since this is a crowdfunded project, it would be really helpful if you clicked like or commented or shared this on social media. It would go a long way. The first step, of course, is to add the NTS-1 to the MIDI Goblin. You can do this yourself manually by following the instructions in the video below, or you can just download the NTS-1 zip file from midigoblin.com. Simply unzip that file, drag that folder onto the MIDI Goblin SD card, and you're good to go. This zip file actually has a few default patches included with it. You don't need to keep them, but I highly suggest you keep at least one. This will help you sync up the MIDI Goblin and the NTS-1 first time around. Let's try the MIDI controller method out first. This is my favorite method because it actually gives you hands-on control over all of the NTS-1's parameters. With that being said, you'll need a MIDI controller that has 5-pin out. You'll also need 2 5-pin MIDI cables and 1 5-pin to TRS adapter. Make sure you use Type A. Type B looks identical, but those don't work. Once you have everything ready, just connect the output of the MIDI controller to the MIDI Goblin's input and the MIDI Goblin's output to the NTS-1's input. Once everything's connected, select NTS-1 from your menu, turn on MIDI CC through in the settings menu, and then set your MIDI channel. A massively important note here is that Korg seems to have made a mistake with the way the NTS-1 displays its MIDI channels. For example, if it's displaying MIDI channel 0, it's receiving over MIDI channel 1. If it's displaying channel 4, it's receiving over MIDI channel 5. Basically everything's off by 1. It's really not a big deal though. If the NTS-1 is displaying MIDI channel 0, just set the Goblin to MIDI channel 1. If the NTS is displaying channel 4, set the Goblin to channel 5. It's pretty easy. The final step is just load any patch from the MIDI Goblin. Once you load a patch, the MIDI Goblin and the NTS will be synced up. From there, you're free to edit your patches using your MIDI controller and save those patches on the MIDI Goblin. If you don't want to have the MIDI controller connected to the MIDI Goblin later down the road, you actually don't need it to be. The MIDI Goblin can send those patches to the NTS-1 just fine without it. The next method I want to cover is using the NTS-1 editor by Momo. It's fantastic. All you need is a USB to MIDI adapter, a 5-pin MIDI cord, and a TRS Type A adapter. Plug the USB end of your adapter into your computer. Plug the 5-pin output end of the USB adapter into the MIDI Goblin's input, and then plug the MIDI Goblin's output into the NTS's input. In the NTS-1 editor, you just need to select the USB connection as the output, and then press Send. Doing this will sync the app, the MIDI Goblin, and the NTS-1 all together. From there, you can just edit the parameters on your computer. On the MIDI Goblin, if you're in the CC monitor, things might transmit a little bit slower than usual, so just make sure to take some time while editing your parameters. When you have a sound that you like, simply press Save on the MIDI Goblin, and it will save those values. After that, you don't need your computer anymore. You can send the patches to the NTS-1 without it. And that's it for this video. Please follow us here on social media. Please visit midigoblin.com and sign up for the email list. We will send you one email when the Kickstarter is about to launch. Goodbye!